Let's dive into one of the most dramatic constitutional showdowns in India's history. Seriously, this is a big one. It's a story that starts on a simple family farm, but it explodes into this epic battle between a defiant parliament and the Supreme Court. It all ends with the court drawing a line in the sand, a fight for the very soul of the Constitution.
But before we get into the weeds, let me ask you something. Think about your fundamental rights for a second. Are they truly permanent? Are they untouchable? Or could a government, even one you voted for, just decide to change or even take them away? That question is right at the heart of the Golaknath case. And the answer? Well, it shook the very foundations of Indian democracy.
So, where did this colossal legal battle even begin? You might think it started in the halls of Parliament or a fancy law office. But nope, it all started on a piece of farmland in Punjab, with two brothers named Henry and William Golaknath.
Okay, so here's what was going on. The Punjab state government had passed a law back in 1953. This law basically put a cap, a ceiling, on how much agricultural land any one person could own. Because of this, the government looked at the Golaknath brothers' land, said you've got too much, and took over the excess.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. The Golaknaths didn't just sue over the state law. No, they went for the jugular. They challenged the Constitution itself. They argued that the 17th Amendment, which was put in place to protect these kinds of land reform laws, was actually violating their fundamental right to property. And just like that, their personal fight was on its way to becoming a full-blown national crisis.
And boom, a dispute over a family farm suddenly spiraled into this monumental constitutional question. The case landed in front of a massive 11-judge bench of the Supreme Court, and they were forced to answer one of the toughest questions a democracy can ever face.
The court really had to wrestle with three massive issues. First, and most importantly, can Parliament just change or even completely get rid of fundamental rights? Second, and this is the real technical legal battleground, is a constitutional amendment considered a law? See, if it is a law, then Article 13 of the Constitution says no law can violate fundamental rights. Big problem. And third, what exactly are the limits of Parliament's power to amend the Constitution under Article 368? Is it infinite?
So the battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side, you had the Golaknath's lawyers arguing that fundamental rights are sacred, they're on a pedestal, and they're totally beyond Parliament's reach. They insisted that a constitutional amendment is a law and has to play by the rules. But the government shot back, saying, hey, we are the sovereign Parliament. We have the ultimate power to amend any part of the Constitution, especially to bring about crucial social justice through land reforms.
All right, so the arguments are in, and the whole nation is watching. The Supreme Court is about to deliver its verdict. And this wasn't just any old judgment. This was a moment that was going to define the balance of power between the citizen and the state for decades. And the decision? Wow, it was an absolute nail-biter. It came down to a razor-thin 6-5 majority. Just think about that. The highest court in the land was split right down the middle. That's how monumental this question was. The fate of the Republic was literally hanging by a thread.
The majority dropped a bombshell. In a truly historic ruling, the Supreme Court declared that Parliament has absolutely no power to shorten or take away fundamental rights, period. They essentially built a giant constitutional wall around these rights, making them off-limits to the legislature.
Chief Justice Subba Rao, writing for the majority, put it in these unforgettable words. He said that fundamental rights are transcendental and immutable. It's a fancy way of saying they exist on a higher spiritual plane, that they're permanent and simply cannot be changed by whatever party happens to be in power.
Now, the court was smart. They knew this ruling could cause complete chaos, maybe even voiding amendments made in the past. So to avoid that mess, they introduced a new legal tool to India, something borrowed from American law. It's called the Doctrine of Prospective Overruling. It basically meant their decision would only apply from this day forward. Past amendments were safe, but from now on, Parliament's power had a clear limit.
So, do you think Parliament just took this lying down? Did they say, okay, you win, our mistake? Not a chance. The Golaknath judgment kicked off an immediate and incredibly forceful political backlash. The stage was now set for the next round in this epic constitutional fight.
Parliament's response was, to put it mildly, swift and decisive. Within just a few years, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, they launched a massive legislative counterattack. The 24th Amendment was a direct slapback at the court, explicitly stating Parliament could amend any part of the Constitution. And it was immediately followed by the 25th and 26th Amendments, which directly challenged the Supreme Court's authority.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's it. Parliament won, story over.
But here's where things get really fascinating. Parliament's aggressive response actually paved the way for an even bigger constitutional showdown. And in a wild twist of fate, it was this very act of defiance that ended up cementing the legacy of the ruling it tried to kill.
Okay, so get ready for the big surprise twist. That specific ruling in the Golaknath case, the one that said Parliament absolutely cannot touch fundamental rights, well, today, it's not actually the law. It was eventually overturned in another even more famous case.
But, and this is the most important part of the whole story, the spirit of the Golaknath ruling didn't die. Far from it. The central idea that there are some parts of the Constitution so fundamental that even Parliament can't touch them not only survived, but it was reborn in an even more powerful form.
And this is what gave birth to the legendary basic structure doctrine. It was finally established in the landmark Kesavananda Bharati case, and it stands as the ultimate legacy of Golaknath. The new rule was this brilliant compromise. Parliament can amend the Constitution, sure, even fundamental rights, but it cannot change or destroy its core, its fundamental essence, what we now call its basic structure. Things like democracy, secularism, and the rule of law.
So why do we still talk about Golaknath today, even though it was overturned? Because it was a huge deal. It was the first time the Supreme Court really stood up and told Parliament, no, your power is not absolute. It massively strengthened the court's role as the Constitution's guardian. It triggered the whole chain of events that gave us the basic structure doctrine, and it brought a vital legal tool into Indian law. It was a case that lost the battle, but in the long run, it absolutely won the war of ideas.
And this all leaves us with a really profound question, one that every democracy has to grapple with. If a government is elected by the people, by a majority, should its power to rewrite the fundamental rules of the nation be unlimited? Or should there be a line, a core, a basic structure that can never, ever be crossed? That debate, the one started by the Golaknath brothers on their farm in Punjab, is one we're still having to this day.